Broadcasting from the world headquarters of the National Floor Safety Institute is America's slip and fall guy, Russ Kendzior.
This is America's slip and fall guy, Russ Kendzior. Thanks for listening to my podcast. When I ask people about slip and falls and talk about slip and fall victims or people that have been injured as a result of a slip and fall, they almost always get it wrong. They'll tend to think of a scam artist, someone that's just trying to make a quick buck, by suing a company for their insurance. Sometimes they'll think of a older person that maybe just wasn't paying attention. And how often do we hear the phrase, "Why don't you just watch where you're walking?" But the reality is really quite different. And joining us today is Alyssa Bologna-Bosson, who I learned of, how long ago was it, Alyssa? 15 years ago?
About, yeah.
When you were, 17?
Yes.
And I'll give a little bit of your backstory, but you were a young woman, high school swimmer, and you were swimming, got out of the swimming pool and was going to the coach's office, which was right off the swimming pool, and experienced what turned out to be a life-changing event for you. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Well, we'll kind of fill it in from there. What happened exactly? How did your injury take place?
Well, I was lifeguarding, and the only way to check in and out for work was to go into the back office and clock in and out. So when I was walking out of the office, I walked down the tiled ramp, which is the only exit, and I slipped. I didn't realize how bad of an injury it was. I couldn't get up, and I just knew to lay there, but I didn't even have it in my mind how serious and extensive the injuries were. I had no idea till going to the hospital and having all the x-rays and figuring out what the injury was. Because even for me, I was in the best shape of my life. I was a varsity swimmer, and it was a fall. How bad could it have been? But it definitely changed my life. My kneecap went out of place, and when it tried to go back in after the fall, it sheared off 2/3 of my kneecap. So I just had it floating on the side of my leg, and then my medial tendon was snapped in half. The doctor said they looked like the end of broomsticks. I dislocated my hip, which the doctors didn't diagnose in the beginning and didn't figure out till a couple months after I learned to rewalk. So the muscles already were trained for it being out of place, and the rehab on that, it was always just trying to pull it back out of place. And that was probably the extent of it. I did bruise my femur and messed up my back a little bit, but yeah.
Now, were you? I'm sorry to have you recall that. But were you going? You said down a ramp or up a ramp?
Yes. So in the coach's office, the only way to get in and out was a tiled ramp, that shiny, slick tile, and there was a water polo convention going on. So coaches were in and out all day, tracking in water, and it was just a perfect storm.
Now, a lot of people don't know. I didn't know this, but most swimmers, people that are, well, like you, really a great swimmer, generally have concerns about walking barefooted. Sometimes you wear like a flip-flop or a sandal. Were you wearing shoes or were you barefooted?
I was wearing shoes, yes. I had flip-flops on.
Okay, and that's very typical.
Yes.
Right? For swimmers.
Unless I'm in the water, I don't like being barefoot.
Yeah, I learned that. A lot of swimmers are the same way. They're concerned of athlete's foot, or is that right?
There's that, and you can get like warts and all different things from the pool deck. It just has that perfect whatever bacteria can grow on the surface, and it stays damp, and it's a little bit warmer in the pool. So it's just not a really good situation.
So this is kind of the perfect storm. You're walking on an inclined ramp that was wet, and you were wearing flip-flops, which are certainly not safety shoes. In fact, flip-flops are notorious for being very slippery. Obviously, the high school natatorium that you were at was aware of all that, but apparently just disregarded the safety of their swimmers. Was this a common event? Were other girls or swimmers that you were friends with, would they experience any type of injuries? Maybe not, obviously not as serious, but was it commonplace for people to slip and fall on the?
Definitely common. while I was lifeguarding, I was also teaching swim lessons, and I would have the kids walk on a grate on the pool deck because the pool deck was so slippery, and I hated watching those little kids fall. There was another swimmer right after me. She broke her wrist in the coach's office almost a year later. So it's just ridiculous. And I went to school right behind a natatorium, so I would see pregnant women walk in, I'd see older people walk in, and if that could happen to me at the prime of my life, like what could happen to these other people who weren't as in shape or weren't as young. I
Right.
don't.
And your goal was to be a college swimmer, right? That was where you were headed.
Yes, it was, and that totally derailed it.
I could imagine. Yeah, I mean, not only was this a serious physical injury, but an emotional injury, and obviously set you on a spiral of just having to deal with really all this trauma.
Yeah,
Am I right?
absolutely. I feel like my childhood ended there, and there was me before the accident and me after. I feel like I lost my smile for a couple months, and everything was pretty dark. That swimming was my first love, and not being able to do it was pretty detrimental to my emotional and physical health. I would wake up some nights and not even be able to roll over when I was in the prime of my life, and it was tough. I'd dream about swimming and then not be able to even get out of bed. So it was tough. And they weren't able to operate right away because it was a workers' comp injury. And so I was in bed, just a broken little bird almost. And it was tough. It was tough.
Well, they had insult to injury. I actually was approached by a company through the NFSI that was a manufacturer of coatings that was applied to surfaces like swimming pool decks or areas that were normally wet. And they asked for us to provide a location that they can apply their product. And I went, believe it or not, to the very natatorium, the swimming pool deck at the high school that you eventually slipped and fell on. And shockingly had, I say shockingly, that was then, not now. Nothing surprises me today, but they had no interest in having a free product applied to their high risk areas. Being a school, you would think that they would have a interest in maybe saving taxpayer money, but they didn't. They really had no interest in it and all. Then, of course, it was several months, maybe a year later, you fell, and that's how I learned about you, is through your parents who knew of the NFSI, knew of what we were doing in the same town, and kind of a small world, but a really tragic solution or condition. So what happened? You had surgery, and then how did your recovery go?
It was tough. Like I said, it was a workers' comp injury. So they cut my physical therapy before I could walk, and it was just always an uphill battle. I was very, very lucky that my mom was such a strong advocate for me. If I didn't have my family or any of that support, I couldn't have made it through this injury or even have gotten as far as I did, just because fighting the injury alone was enough, but to also fight for, doctor appointments or to fight for physical therapy, I couldn't do it.
Yeah, well, again, you are not the stereotypical, what people would think of as a slip and fall victim. You're, like you said, you were young, at the peak of health, an athlete, a varsity athlete on a very competitive swim team. And it changed your life, as it does most people. Most victims are survivors of a fall. Your family wound up having to incur financial expenses due to this, and eventually brought a lawsuit against the school, which was also traumatic, not only for your family, but for you to have to go through that process of, a lot of people don't get this, but most people don't like suing. They don't want to sue anybody. They're very reluctant to hire lawyers and go out and file lawsuits, but your family did. And I know I was a part of that process as well. And that came to a closure after several years. It took a while, didn't it?
Yes, it did. And
And
we actually couldn't touch the school because of a Texas law. You can't touch schools in Texas. So we had to go after the builder and architect of the pool who knew that it was high slip tile, not to be used near bathrooms, pools, saunas, anywhere that has water.
mm. Well, it's interesting. I did an interview last week with an architect on this very subject, and he had a lot more to say about this than I think other architects may even be aware of. But it is a chronic problem, and the architectural community, like others, really suffers from lack of knowledge or ignorance, and frankly, they just rely upon the manufacturers, the companies that make these surfaces, and oftentimes don't report the true slip resistant value of the product, or don't report anything. And so architects are oftentimes in the dark. Not that that's an excuse, because they shouldn't be in the dark. They should educate themselves so they know better. In your case, they didn't. And sadly, as you mentioned, other people were slipping and falling as well. And perhaps not as serious as yours, but hey, it could have been. In fact, thank God yours wasn't worse, because it could have been.
Oh,
Many people
absolutely.
many people die as a result of a fall. Uh, but there's a silver lining in your story. And you and I have known each other and your family for many, many years, and you've done really just an amazing job of getting through that identity crisis and physical crisis and emotional crisis. Just you really been through a lot, and today you're actually a member of the NFSI B101 committee that's authoring standards on this very subject. So you turned a bad situation into one that you can now and are helping prevent happen to other people. Tell us a little bit about that, your experience on the committee and working there.
Well, it's definitely been healing for me personally to know that I am making a difference. And I do want to thank you for that, Russ. You've been a big factor in helping me get through it as well. But it's just great because I can be this face. It's not this joke about falling or, oh, that only happens to old people, or I'm a real viable person and my story needs to be heard. And it's great that I can turn around and say, no, actually, this could happen. It happened to me.
So, what advice would you give to people who, like you, have experienced a serious fall? How can you go about recommending some path of recovery, or any advice to other folks that have gone through similar events like yours?
Definitely reach out. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Get help from every asset, everywhere you can in that healing process. And even when it's painful, you have to go through the physical therapy and you have to get back to as close to normal as you can.
How are you doing today? How's the knee and the hip today as far as the recovery?
So I can walk around. I'm not disabled, but there are times where I'm just in severe pain. There are times where I can't bend down. There are times where my knee doesn't work, or I want to go work out and my body can't handle it. So I'm thankful for I still am able to walk. I'm still able to go out and work out most days, but there are those days that catch up and it reminds me. And it's tough to not go to a dark place and feel bad and feel sorry. But then I remember of how much I really do have and try to hold on to that.
Um, we talked a moment ago about other swimmers. How did they react? How did the coaches react? How did your teammates react? What was kind of the feedback that you're getting from the folks who were aware of your injury at the time?
It was very hush hush. It was very, target me out, don't wear flip flops, but the rest of the team's wearing flip flops. And, as a young girl, it's hard to be targeted like that and to make me feel like it was my fault. I remember I wasn't ready to go back to work as a lifeguard because I didn't want to be responsible for someone else's life as a lifeguard if I couldn't handle the physical nature of it. And everyone I worked with made me feel so bad about, I was faking it or it wasn't real or it was tough. I was definitely bullied by
I hate
adults.
this. Well, no surprise there either. That's a common response where people, they'll look at you and say, you look fine. I mean, what do you mean you're hurt? You can't be hurt. Look at you. You look great. And even if you have scars, they'll say, you got over it. And, what's the big deal? Kind of shake it off. And as an athlete, you're kind of used to hearing that, hey, if you're hurting, kind of shake it off and ice it down, kind of minimize the severity of the injury. It's a bit surprising that your teammates would say that. I'm not surprised that coaches and that might respond that way, sadly. But that certainly didn't help your recovery at all, or just accepting what happened at the time.
Right. And most of my teammates were very supportive. I remember they brought me gifts after in the hospital and to my room and everything. The teammates were actually great. It was really just the staff, anyone associated with the aquatic center, the director of the aquatic center, and coaches were just kind of tough about it.
Yeah.
Even the coach on duty and was kind of managing the aquatic center when my injury happened told the ambulance to drive away, that I didn't need it. And my dad had to put me in the back of his Jeep. And I can tell you where every pothole, every bump in the road is on the road from the aquatic center to the hospital, because it was one of the most excruciating drives of my life.
So you requested an ambulance and they made the decision not to call an ambulance?
I don't remember why. There was like a football game or something, but there was actually an ambulance already there, and they actually backboarded me into my dad's Jeep because I couldn't move. Any movement was so excruciatingly painful. And they told him, no, please don't take her in the ambulance. And I think they were just afraid of incurring that cost because it happened at the aquatic center.
I got to tell you, the school district you go to, that my children went to, is certainly not poor. It's probably one of the wealthiest there is, not only in the state, but maybe even the country. So to hear that this would be a cost issue is, again, just that much more disturbing. Sadly, not uncommon. Oftentimes, this is the case in many fall-related injuries where an EMT is not called or kind of told, it's not a big deal, don't worry about it, only to find out they're very, very serious events. Now, kind of bring us up to speed. What are you doing today?
So I'm a realtor. I live in Rogers, Arkansas, near Bentonville, Northwest Arkansas. I got married. We are very happy, and there are moments where it sneaks back up, and every once in a while I have that deja vu or I have that panic moment. But for the most part, I try to just be that light and not really dwell on it, and just be thankful for all the opportunities it's really brought me, and meeting you and being able to help in other realms on the committee. And just
you don't always have a lot of agreement on that committee, do you?
No.
We have all types that are all over the board, but that's good. It's a really constructive process, and we appreciate you spending the time serving on the committee. And you're a very brave woman. You've gone through something that's very traumatic. You didn't let it define your life. You pushed through it with the support of your family and now your husband. And you're kind of one of my slip and fall heroes because you didn't let it beat you. And it really could have. It's a hard thing to get through, and you did. So I want to thank you for telling us your story.
Thanks, Russ. Thanks for letting me tell it.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, this is America's Slip and Fall Guy, Russ Kendzior. Thanking you again for listening to my podcast. And until next time, make sure your next step isn't your last step.